name's Euan McQueen. I've been in and around railways for over the last 50 years, both as an employee and in dealing with heritage and in advisor and consultant and all sorts of odd jobs.
The historic cranes and the goods sheds. Now, that's a big goods sheds down in Greymouth there. There's a lot of talk about that should go. It's, we think it's over 100 years old. It's a pretty ugly looking building, but it has a lot of history.
Well, it's a utility building. It's designed and built as a utility building. It wasn't designed to be beautiful. But it was not just for goods coming into Greymouth from Canterbury. It was also handled goods which came off ships. And in the days before the Otura Tunnel was opened, a lot of Greymouth and Westport's freight would come by sea, and that would be unloaded into wagons and taken across to the goods shed, and there it was sorted for distribution. It was like a huge courier depot, but it didn't work quite as fast. And the same went for outwards goods, although most of it over time, the outward freight became essentially coal, and there was some timber, occasionally other things. But that shed, and good sheds around the country, which varied in size, of course, according to the town area they served, they were like courier depots. Freight was put there by railways, mostly by rail, occasionally by trucks that handled small lots along the line, and the owners came and picked it up. The station master advised them there's stuff there for them, and so on. Good sheds can tell a lot of stories about what happens in each area.
I remember them as a fairly young child, back in the 1960s it would have been. Dad had a grocery shop in Gurden, Nimmo's store there, and we used to go over in the old Morrie van that they'd put the tailboard on and back into the good sheds and load up the spuds.
Right.
If we were really lucky, we'd be able to actually go straight to the train and actually back up to the train and open the cabin, the doors there, and it was great fun getting among all the straw with the spuds and things. So those are some of my earliest memories associated.
Well, you could do that in a place the size of Greymouth. It was local. You couldn't do it in Wellington or Auckland, but you'd find that be replicated around the country. I lived in Waimate in South Canterbury in the 1960s, and the daily train came in about 4 o'clock. But if somebody wanted something urgently, the staff were always ready to go and pick it out of the van, but usually they unloaded at 7 o'clock the next morning, and it was all there ready for people to pick up. It grew to, life worked to a schedule. It wasn't really as fast as now. But freight came through from Christchurch on the famous perishable train, and it was ready next morning. And people skite now about how it gets there so quickly by road, but if it comes over the night by road, nobody's ready to pick it up till 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. The service is just the same as it was. It probably closes off a bit later in Christchurch, that's all. But handling all that's very expensive, and rail has in effect moved out of that and given it to other people to handle all the small lots and stuff like that. But they'll fill up with small lots for containers, say from Auckland to Christchurch, and they'll rail that down all the way, and that'll be unloaded by railways.
So, Euan, on the scale of things, where does Greymouth, obviously not now, but you're talking about 1950s, where did it fit in as rail's concerned in New Zealand? Was it one of the busiest areas?
It was busy in terms of train movement, and that's because the locomotives they had here, and there were a few diesel shunters here in the 50s, but the rest was all steam. They weren't big locos, they weren't the big mainliners like the North Island main truck or indeed the South Island main truck. And they tended to haul small loads. There were locos here that weighed only not much over 40 tonnes. And they would go up the railway incline, and they might bring down 15, 20 wagons there, and they might pick up a few more, but they'd bring that into Greymouth, perhaps 20, 25 wagon train, each queue wagon holding 6 tonnes, and that gives you 150 tonnes. That's a peanut train, really, in terms of railway use. Now your collies going through the tunnel, they'll be 30 wagons of 50 tonnes each, so that gives you 1,500 tonnes, driven by 2 locos and 1 man. And that's the difference between then and now. And we're talking, 50 years plus.
So from a traffic movement, it would be up there, obviously not as much as the main cities, but if you take out the 4 main cities, it would be one of the next busiest.
I'm sure it would be, yes. I suspect it might even be busier than Dunedin. But Invercargill would be another busy regional centre. Palmerston North was busy. Hamilton, Frankton was certainly very busy. That would be up amongst the leaders. And but in terms of provincial centres, but it was because of the particular nature of the routes of railways here. There are a number of short lines bringing in traffic for hauls of sometimes, say, Ruanui to the port. That's what, 15 kilometres. And that would be one of the shortest hauls in the country.
Yes.
But because it was all geared to rail and the ability of the cranes at the wharf to lift the body of the wagons and dump it in the ships in one fell swoop, it went by rail rather than road. And road transport then was very unsophisticated and small scale compared to now.
Euan, there's a bit of talk at present. As a district, we're trying to grapple with how important history is. Branna mine site is now recognised as one of the most important industrial sites from a historic point of view in the country.
Yes.
Yet it could have easily been completely destroyed. We're trying to grapple with this as a community now, how our port area is a link to our history, the reason that Greymouth is on the Grey River. We have the link with the goods sheds and those two Cow and Sheldon cranes that had just left. The third crane was sold to Westport and has since been dismantled in the last couple of months. From what I can tell, there were 4 areas in New Zealand that had these cranes in the 1950s, and that was Auckland, Wellington, Littleton and Greymouth, was my understanding. They were built in Carlisle and shipped out here and put together. We're the only place for them left. Any thoughts on how important they are to our area? Because as a community we're grappling with what to do. They're here, they were advertised for demolition, but a few of us are saying, actually, let's just slow down. This is an important link with our past.
Well,
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a general point that New Zealand has really begun to recognise its European heritage only in the last 20 or 30 years. We were still in vaguely pioneer mode. We were busy growing, busy doing things, and so the past was not terribly relevant. The people of my parents' generation, for example, had a true sense of history of their family or of the region, but in terms of heritage as opposed to history, things, well, that was just there. And I've watched in my lifetime the movement from heritage being regarded as a somewhat wonky hobby to something that's mainstream. And it's reflected in all sorts of ways. And you'll find, I suspect, people like of my generation who've become intensely interested over the last, say, 30, 40, 50 years, to people of my parents who were not uninterested but were just disinterested because there wasn't this concept of heritage over that period. Now it's here, but you'll still find conservative communities will tend to say, well, you know, we've had this, but it's just a hunk of old steel, and then you get $5,000 for scrap or something. But more and more people are coming round to the view that, look, you know, the coast, for example, has a very rich heritage in machinery, in mining, in native timber milling, in gold extraction. Sure, there are extractive industries, and for a while they weren't respectable, but the machinery that's been involved in that, and the nature of the work that mainly men did in it, was, to look back on it, quite absorbing. It was a tough life and a risky life, that's you know, the whole mood has changed in my lifetime. I began to become aware of heritage essentially through my interest in railways, was the change from steam to diesel. And that was mainly in the 1960s. So that's 40 years ago, and I think I probably would have been a bit of pioneering there. But now, you know, there's the Historic Places Trust, there's people like us, the Rail Heritage Trust, there's people, local groups like yours, the Greymouth Heritage Trust. They're all there going out doing it. And you know what it's like. There's some people in the community who think, we know these funny old people saving on a bunch of junk. But their kids will value what you did. And my kids are not old. Well, they're too busy, you know, with kids and mortgages and all those things now. But they respect it, they understand it, and that's a generational thing we've gone through in this country. And in the coast, you've got aspects of our European history, which is unusual. I mean, sure, there's coal mining elsewhere, inland Taranaki, North Auckland, Southland, but it's very particular here because the region was essentially extractive industry until farming really got going in the years after World War II.
And it's interesting because in many ways we're looking back now at these cranes that were built about when I was born. We're talking about mid-50s. And some of the comments are made, well, they're not old. They're not old. But they are to our children. They're very old. And they're getting old to some of us too. And
well, they represent a technology of the time.
Yes.
That was the last time of the big cranes. Now with the containers, you have straddle carriers, container cranes, quite different design, electrically powered, and all those sorts of things. They were if you like, pretty well the last of the Mohicans. Now, in my view, they should be preserved for two reasons. One is because they represent a technology at the time that was widely used on the coast, both here and at Westport. And secondly, that they are, if you like, a sort of flagship for the link between the railway and the port, which was the guts of the coast transport system for many, many decades, from the 1880s through really to about the 1960s.
Yes, and some people have said, well, hey, if they were steam cranes, the early steam cranes, they would be worth preserving, but we haven't got them to preserve. We've got what we have. And so it still gives a link, and it's also a very strong visual link of our town with that heritage. Those derricks.
Yes, I've commented elsewhere.
Derricks, is that the right word? I'm not sure.
Jibs.
Jibs,
yeah,
thank you.
I've commented elsewhere, as you know, that Greymouth, the backdrop to Greymouth as a town is marvellous. The hills, the ridge lines, the Omoto cutting, the river, and so on. But the town itself has a fairly neutral character. Simply because of the nature of how it's grown, and there's one big building, the Kingsgate, but there's some other very smart buildings gone up recently, I have to say. It's maturing in that sense, and that's good. But I think the cranes represent an era. They're a fairly simple but very eye-catching form of a marker, if you like, of Greymouth and coal. And other than a mine itself, and really you can't sort of preserve too much of a mine. It's in most cases the old ones are a hole in the ground. There's a rich oral history and so on. And I think to preserve those cranes would be something that people look back on. And my test is always, right, we're wondering about it now, whether we should or not. What will we think in 30 or 40 years' time? What will people think in 30 or 40 years' time? And say, gosh, thank goodness somebody preserved that. Because I can think of things around the country now that people have wanted to discard or scrap, and it's now part of the conventional wisdom of heritage that they're there. And that's a cycle that tends to be a generation, 30 to 40 years, when that change of view takes place.
That's right, and that's why we saw that the signal box, which is only a little bit over 100 years old, it was important to actually retain. Well, and it would be easy to send it to Shantytown, which would be great there too, but I'm saying, there's quite a few of us saying, this is a home, this is where it belongs.
In terms of heritage integrity, Shantytown, a railway of that scale would never have had a signal box, so it would be out of place. Secondly, there is a sort of precinct there. There's the station building, which is a nice old building and which has been well preserved by the railway company. And there's a signal box which is really, to play on words, a signal feature, a visual feature of the approach to the town. And now, of course, there's the span of the old Cobden Bridge, which is another reminder of the changes which have taken place in transport. It fits. There's a sort of contiguity between them, which 1 plus 1 plus 1, the three different ones equals in my mind sort of 4 or 5, whereas each one in its own right is just one, and that's what gives that visual link, and people associate. Oh gosh, that's a bit of Greymouth's history. They don't sort of wax eloquent over it, but they will just recognise it and say, it's a good feeling to them that the town respects its history like that.
That's right, and we're getting good feedback already, and it's only been painted a couple of months, so so it's a good start. And I think it's the same with the cranes. We started off by saying, hey guys, let's talk about these rather than just getting rid of them. Let's at least talk about it. And there's been quite a turnaround, and now we have our local mayor, Tony Cockshaw, and he freely says we've got to somehow keep them. And that's a mindset just by not being aggro, not being too stroppy, just talking and saying, let's talk about these issues. They're important.
You also had a letter which was probably mildly persuasive, but
a letter from you, thank you. Yes.
But no, I come back to my point about a marker. The Greymouth urban landscape, because the area is flat, it's always hard to make a distinguished landscape in an urban area. And you can do it by big blocks of big trees, or you can do it by a building, or the classic marker is the sadly badly bent Christchurch Cathedral. It's a marker for Christchurch, and with the Wellington Railway Station is a marker which is surrounded by open space. And the Sky Tower in Auckland, in a modern sense, they've got these big structures that stand out, and you see the Sky Tower in Auckland straight away. And I think, if Greymouth can afford it, and I recognise the money question, that would be good markers. The two of them, preferably, maybe it had to be one, but let's say the two. And you've got something that, that's the town with the cranes. Yeah. And lots of towns have got distinguishing features, some of them distinctly unexciting, but they've still got them. And you remember Awakuni with its carrot.
Euan, I have to let you go, but one last question. Queue wagons, people talk about the queue wagons. Are they unique to Greymouth?
No, they were used also at Westport. They were used also for taking locomotive coal to Christchurch from the coast. They were really unique to the coast for most of their lives, and they were used in the mines, especially Denniston. They used queue wagons and up in the Bullet. And from here, any shipping traffic had to be in queue wagons. Domestic traffic for gasworks, and even for rowing coal. That actually went up queues by sea, but for the gasworks around the country, that went by ordinary high-sided wagons. A lot of them didn't have air brakes. So it was another skill in Greymouth was making up a train, so you had all your air brakes at the front and your non-air at the back. And there's some few grades around here. There was some skilled driving, it had to be skilled driving, and the guard at the back, but we could put the brake on the van if need be. But it was a far cry from operating practices of today, where you have one man in the cab, good, solid, reliable air brakes, in effect power brakes, dynamic braking on the locomotive can slow the train. Lots of huge technical advances like that. And that's what's kept railways going. If we're still running a services like you used to in Grey, you wouldn't, railway would be closed. So
the queue wagons were designed so the bottoms could open for emptying.
Yeah, you lifted the body up. It was in effect an oblong frame on wheels, and the body was tapered. They held about 6 tons of coal, and they held hooks, and these big hooks came down off the ship's crane, or the crane on the wharf, depending, usually the crane on the wharf, and went up, and a man with a long pole knocked the hanger underneath, and the coal fell into the hold, and you lifted the wagon back to the back and popped it under its frame again, and it settled into notches, and but made sure the doors were shut, and away she went. It was a very simple technology, not a terribly efficient one, but good for the time.
And so those cranes, obviously, that are there would be the only ones left that were designed with queue wagons in mind.
If Westport's gone, yes, that would be the case.